Well, I am so honored to be here with Congresswoman Haley Stevens, the champion for the motor vehicle parts supplier in Michigan and across the country. We're having a first of a series of interviews with prominent public officials with Haley. Very grateful that she has a few minutes. So we're going to jump right in if that's okay with you. The President had an announcement last week to add some tariffs, $18 billion in tariffs. Some of our members have some concerns about them. Some of them think that it will be beneficial. We don't have the HTS code, so we don't know exactly what this is yet, but we know that probably our industry has the highest tariff increases in terms of steel, aluminum, and various EV cars and components, batteries, etc. Yeah. Tell us what you're thinking and what you think what the impacts will be on our industry.
So look, we know that we have just not had a level playing field with China for too long. And I also know, as a lawmaker who is really dedicated to our motor vehicle parts industry, as someone who visits manufacturers regularly, I have my program called Manufacturing Monday. Yes. I see how global and diverse and interconnected our auto industry is. Supply chains are robust. They're extensive. We're selling into many markets. Certainly, all of your members really helped in my first term of Congress when we were renegotiating NAFTA and passing USMCA and thinking through what that would mean for the industry. And the demand was consistency. We need stability. And I'm so thrilled that we got that trade deal done with the labor force dealt in as well. And in part because that gave us a competitive framework to be able to compete. Now, when we start looking at the tools in our toolkit vis-a-vis China, we recognize that they are going to continue to pursue some of the dumping strategies, the state-owned enterprise, vertical supply chain, and it poses a real threat. And certainly our OEs, a lot of your customers, are deeply concerned around, BYD and its cost and what's happened in Europe. We saw in the third quarter of last year that China all of a sudden became the largest exporter of vehicles. And we also recognize that there's some political dynamics at play here. And so while I know our parts suppliers need to be able to sell into a multitude of markets, that we've got these interconnected, complex global supply chains. We can't just say make it in America because it feels good. We've got to really look at the full spectrum of how the industry works. And so I think that the president took the right step. He kind of took that necessary step. And I also know that our trade representative, Catherine Tai, maintains a very open line, is eager to hear. We've got to see, we obviously aren't going to implement willy-nilly, but as these tariffs get implemented and some of the ramifications come down, we've got the ability to weigh in. And then, frankly, balls in our court for trade strategy and how we're going to be thinking about this industry going forward in competitiveness. China isn't Japan. This isn't the 1980s. We certainly aren't just going to be able to ride on some of the coattails that, we have been riding on. And, we were all worried about Japanese automakers, 40 years ago. And obviously that took a bite of the market. But this is a different level of threat just because the rules really aren't being followed.
Well, what's interesting is this administration has done a really good job restoring American competitiveness. Whether you look at the IRA, you look at the CHIPS Act, you look at the infrastructure bill, all three of those, and two of them were very bipartisan, actually. All three of them were beneficial to our industry in different ways. How do you see that type of a strategy? Isn't it a better strategy to do proactive carrots to the industry rather than the sticks like the tariffs?
Right. You got to do both. I mean, that was what was somewhat missing for a handful of years when we didn't have real concerted industrial policy. Look, I'm so proud that we got the CHIPS and Science Act done. I was on the conference committee for that bill. I spent a lot of time with our manufacturers, our auto industry. I remember penning our speaker a note a week about CHIPS the year prior. And then all of a sudden hearing our president, hearing our speaker talk about CHIPS, it's entered the political zeitgeist. And what's also entered is real concerted investment, $52 billion, as we all know, that was put into the marketplace, met by $200 billion of capital industry commitments within the first quarter. So in some respects, it almost pays for itself, right? That's the type of competitive strategy we really need. We need American capitalist industrial policy, not what the CCP is doing, or certainly not what they do in Russia. So I think what we have with this policy framework that co-invests, that puts, like you said, that carrot out there, and those models work even with low dollars for the smaller businesses, and we start thinking about technology adoption or automation, software, those types of things, and all of a sudden you start to say to yourself, well, geez, can we lower the barrier to entry? Can we secure this supply chain with cyber, and address AI? So I remain really enthusiastic. Yes, that we got chips done, but also with the point that, some of that was a little bit of the catching up work we needed to do. So what do we need to focus on looking forward? How do we stay truly competitive? We've got a lot to be proud of with our private sector. That helps us to win the day. But the federal government needs to do its part too and step up in a responsible way.
Thank you so much for all your concerns about long-term science R&D. You've been very active on the China Committee, the Select China Committee. It is an important force in the Congress, I would say, these days. We appreciate your moderation in trying to bridge gaps between the business community and some of the folks of very strong national security concern. What are some of your priorities for that committee for the remainder of the year and into 2025? And do you think it'll be around in 2025? It's another question.
The committee has always been a bipartisan effort. Previous Speaker Kevin McCarthy, alongside Hakeem Jeffries, really put this together, and in a very thoughtful way. They assembled all of us on both sides of the aisle right before the committee had its first hearing and said, hey, you're all here to be thoughtful. You're thoughtful lawmakers, and that's how we want to go into this consideration. And that's continuing. We certainly have a fellow Michigander, Mr. Molnar, who's now the chair of the committee. And I personally believe that there is going to be a lot of pressure to see this committee continue into 2025. Because what message does that send if we just say, well, this is all wrapped up? I personally have learned so much on this committee. I came in with my industrial policy tentacles, my manufacturing initiatives, but exposing the CCP for some of the recklessness, their difference of views on government and motivations for why they're acting a certain way. This is forcing us to get our act together, and it's bridging the national security and economic security interests together. The validation for some of the steps that we took with the industrial policy, Biden's Invest in America agenda, was also obviously very rewarding to hear in hearings and in stakeholder briefings. But in terms of some of my objectives, look, I don't want to see us at all take the slant towards decoupling from China. I think we are in a mode of tolerance. Risk mitigation, absolutely. I want to see us diversify. I'm taking a cue from what we did with chips and science. And I'll tell you, our committee report with its, hundreds of recommendations, between national security and economic security, very pronounced, fully fund some of the science elements of chips and science that we still need to do. We created a new technology directorate at the National Science Foundation, again, allowing us to compete. But this is helping us develop a strategy. And so when I look at this, I think, well, we got chips and science. Why aren't we looking at minerals in the same way? Now, that's a slightly different deal because it's not just investment. We obviously need to maybe look at what some of my colleagues, Scott Peters, Mike Levin, on permitting reform, some of the friend-shoring trade type of efforts that we could do around minerals, because we're not going to be able to source all these here. But what we don't want to be is 98% being refined in China and just being so overwhelmingly dependent. And I want to just say to everybody, listening today or who's tuning in, we really want to hear from you on this. I certainly do. I'm tracking, this just the the host of minerals, where were we, where we're not. I had a chance to visit with some of our Japanese counterparts as part of my committee activity. It knocked my socks off and blew me away to hear how concerned they are about minerals and how at the mercy they are at the CCP. So we need to get our heads on around that. That's a little bit of the catch-up. Looking forward, how do we reconcile and adopt the rules of the road for artificial intelligence, quantum? We need to have a quantum initiative. I got legislation on that we're pushing to reauthorize. This is access to supercomputers, the technology, but also the setting up for the rules of the road. And then elevating other democracies, open capitalist market democracies. We got to have some hard conversations, I think, with our friends in Europe, because they're just opening to the floodgates, allowing these CCP-made vehicles in. That's, something that they've chosen to do. But how do we develop a little bit more of a reciprocity, particularly around these new energy solutions? We just see today, front page of the business section in New York Times, Germany leading the way on hydrogen. We've made hydrogen investments. Let's have that technology here.
Our members are now tracking things. They want to do business with China. It's still a very important growing market for them, but they're hedging their bets a little bit. They're investing in other places. Of course, in the ASEAN nations of Asia, but also in Mexico and also, of course, the United States for a lot of the high-end technology and production in the very areas that you're talking about. Talk to us a little bit about USMCA and priorities you have in that area. We're just starting to think about a potential renegotiation in 2026. I think one of the things about the China challenge is getting all of us to think more long-term.
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
Exactly. We need to think long-term, and we do need to look at, various trade agreements and how they exist and make us competitive versus where they don't exist and hurt us as a result. And there's been a lot of conversation on that. And I think we're also in a moment of reckoning. I think back to my first term around the labor movement. And it was, we're in a 21st century labor movement. And then the COVID pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, the pressures on workplace safety standards, the role of unions is only accelerated. Yeah. We're obviously, I'm not dancing around the elephant in the room, coming out of, prehistoric strike with the OEs. And now we're at a place where we're going to have labor at the table in a different way because of what we got with USMCA. So now they're there. They're saying, I can only imagine these conversations. It's not like we're going to be as split as we were at the beginning of those conversations. It's like, we're all at this table. How do we make this better for all of us? And I know in some of the conversations I've been having around town, that has started to percolate. So look, we had to do some technical improvements to USMCA. I'm very proud of that. The lesson learned is also, let's not let trade deals run stagnant. Let's, continue to improve and modify. If we're in a place to reauthorize, again, we want to hear from industry, our supply chain. Your members are going to be very critical in this process. We're all ears to that. And the other beauty is we've got bipartisan buy-in on that. So, sure, we can start off as a little trade skeptical, but then get to the solutions and the answers that we need for the best results for our economy and our automakers and our industry. You all are spending so much on innovation and R&D, by the way. I know we need to do that R&D tax credit. I want to,
yeah,
I did my part.
Really, yes.
I voted for that. But I just start to think about that. And that's a little bit of the frustration. We have some moves towards industrial policy that we have made, but we don't have total state-owned enterprises. A lot of this falls down on these companies. It knocks my socks off when I go in and visit and I see the investments being made, such large-scale investments on the future. And we've got to keep our eyes on that. And frankly, we've learned a lesson with battery electric vehicles and what happened there. And so I believe in responsible stewardship of the taxpayer dollar and leadership for industry partners who, like a lot of others, it's very capital intensive for all of you.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, 3 cheers to your stampers, you know, your
Exactly.
tool and die makers to, you know, quality testers and on. And it wasn't a light switch with COVID-19. I mean, you couldn't just shut down those machines and turn them back on. You know, we needed ramp up time and we needed that innovation going. There's a pat on the back for everything that got accomplished. I mean, you think about it. We passed USMCA 2 weeks before the word COVID was even in our mouths.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing
Yeah,
history.
it was good. It got done. And like I said, you just got demonstration, I think, of Congressman Stevens' knowledge of our industry. We really want to get back to market access. Our industry does. I think it's safe to say most of American manufacturing wants to. And one thing that we've been wondering about is we have this trade initiative called Indo-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum with the Asian nations. Couldn't we make some of that market access? Like, why couldn't some of that be free trade in critical minerals as a start?
You know, the market access point is so important, particularly because one country I left out is India.
Yes,
Right. So you start to think about, again, democracies that we want to be closer to and bring closer to our side, the population growth, the way of doing business. I think back to the recession period, it was all about market access. I mean, that was how we were digging ourselves out of that rut, was selling, you know, exports and helping even the smallest of businesses sell overseas. You sell to Canada? Yep. Well, you're an exporter. Don't forget that.
Exactly.
But look, you think about India, you think about Africa as well, as a minerals destination.
Yeah.
You know, we have State Department people over there right now in the Congo, you know, trying to cut deals, trying to push back on what China has done with the Belt and Road Initiative. And again, we know that a lot of these players, they do want to work with us. They do, but we just have to have the willingness to lead, and we need to have the investment strategy in place. So that is absolutely something that I'm looking to build out in my next legislative agenda coming out of this, years-long effort with the China Competition Committee. Because if we aren't doing that type of open market access, they're going to fill in the gap, and we're going to be behind.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Haley Stevens. Such a leader for our industry. We love your Manufacturing Mondays, and we love the policy chops that you just exhibited here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.